Praise him for bits of overtime. Praise him whose wars we love to fight. Praise him, fat leech and parasite. Amen.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Bougie Horror Podcast Show. I am your host, Ellie Zara, along with my co-host, Luke St. Peter. Luke, say hello to everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Perfect. Does the assignment, understands it, executes it flawlessly. In the last episode, we talked about a lot. We introduced the podcast. We talked about the self-titled Lovecraft Country chapter, as well as Dreams of the Witch House, Abdullah's book, and Hippolyta Disturbs the Universe. In this episode, we are going to finish up the rest of the book. We're going to talk about Jekyll and Hyde Park, Their Narrow House, Horace and the Devil Doll, The Mark of Cain, and the epilogue, as well as our overall thoughts, perhaps our favorite chapters, anything else that we want to highlight before we move on to our next one. We're going to get started with Jekyll and Hyde Park, probably one of the most interesting and the chapter that I think has the most ramifications for the world at large. So basically what Jekyll and Hyde Park is, obviously it's a riff on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Ruby, who is, I believe she's also related to Letitia. I believe or maybe she's like a cousin or a sister. I don't remember. But Ruby's the main star of this one. And what ends up happening is she's looking for jobs everywhere. She has already moved out of the witch house, as we saw in a previous chapter. So now, she really needs a job to pay her rent and stuff like that. Before that, it was going to be a little easier because she was going to be living with Letitia, but now she's got to find her own place. So she's desperately looking for a place. Letitia and Mr. Winthrop called up Braithwaite to get her a job working for him, if I remember correctly. Am I remembering that right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. So pretty sketchy stuff from the get-go. What ends up happening is that he offers her this potion that will turn her into a white woman for basically a day, more or less a day.
Yeah, I feel like it's a 12 to 18 hour thing, not a full 24 hours.
Yeah. So the amount of time you'll typically be awake, or at least most of that time. So yeah, I really, really liked this one. This was one of the most interesting chapters to me. Like I said, in terms of the implications, we learn more about Ruby's mom, the kind of salon and spiritualist combo shop that she had, which honestly seems like a pretty smart way to make money. Maybe not completely honest, but smart. And basically, Ruby turns into this white woman. She calls herself Hillary. I believe Hillary Everest is the name she ultimately goes for, but she switches around a bit. It actually kind of reminded me of being trans and moving around your names and figuring out your identity bit by bit by bit. So
Right.
yeah, I so that kind of reminded me of that. But also Hillary, I put in my notes, Hillary is just let your intrusive thoughts win mode. She'll do the craziest shit. She'll just take a cop out for dinner and just make sure he buys it for her. She'll get this white woman in trouble who Ruby could never get in trouble. She'll do all these very risky things that she would never normally do. But because she's now a white woman, she feels she feels / maybe knows that she can get away with it. I do want to point out that the intersection of racism and misogyny here pointed out very strongly. There's still things that Hillary can't really do because she's a woman, or is looked at weirdly because she's a woman, or can get away with because she's a woman. There's kind of reverse sexism where for example, where men open the doors for women because they're too weak to hold it themselves. So it's seen as a nice gesture, opening the car door for women or something like that. But deep down at the heart of it is still misogyny, right? Still a basic kind of disgust with what women are, which is the fairer sex, right? That those old stereotypes. So that kind of stuff still happens to Hillary. But it's not nearly as bad because she's white. And so, but it's still not great. There's still things there that definitely don't go well for her because she's still a woman, even if she's white.
Right.
But yeah, as always, Luke, what were some of your thoughts on this chapter?
All right, so I thought the twist at the ending was very interesting. I was wondering through the whole chapter, not at all times, but at different spots throughout the chapter, how the potion was even able to be made in the first place.
Right.
And then when we get towards the end of the chapter and Hillary slash Ruby finds the body of the unconscious woman set up on the gadget that's barely keeping her alive. It's like, oh, now it makes sense. Ray the White is using his ancient magic to make this work. Also, another note, like you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, very beginning, that Jekyll and Hyde Park was a twist on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There actually is a Hyde Park in Chicago. Yeah, which I know from previously living in the area. I felt it very interesting that Matt Ruff literally used a real location to do a play on words that basically foreshadowed how the chapter would play out. I thought that was very cool. There were also landmarks at the end of chapter 8 that I recognized from previously living in the area, which we'll discuss at the end of this episode. I don't know. I don't remember enough about Chicago to know whether every single name of a location was accurately used in the book, but I did find it interesting that Matt Ruff used enough names and enough locations that are real in Chicago for people who've lived in the area, whether currently or previously, that they can more relate to the story in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, my experience with Chicago, which I guess I can bring up real quick, is pretty limited. I went to I'm never going to remember the G2 summit. I forget what they call it, whatever it was. The summit that they have with all the international leaders. I went to that in Chicago back in, oh God, I want to say 2011, 2012. Obama was still president. So it was one of his 2 terms, and it was the 2010s. So there you go.
Okay.
Long ass time ago. I went there, and I want to say that Hyde Park is one of the areas actually I was around. I don't know if it's in main parts of Chicago or not, but it sounded vaguely familiar when you said that. So I don't know. Just throwing that out there. I don't have near as much experience as Luke does with Chicago, but I have been there once, maybe twice. So this was a really cool chapter, really interesting kind of implications for the general universe. I really liked the line on page 185 where somebody says, you know, it is what it is. Life isn't fair, Ruby. You need to understand, Ruby. Matt Ruff is listing or kind of going off of what her train of thought is, and she's like, Lord, how she tired of hearing that. Life wasn't fair, but it still would be nice if once in a while someone else had to do the understanding. So I like that line. Thought that was really good, and in general, I like the little twist at the end on page 225 where one of the characters says that it's all just Like I never thought I've read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Have you read that one, Luke?
Yes, forever ago, for a school class, but I don't remember all the details.
Yeah, so I read it, I want to say a couple of years ago for the first time. Still very struck by it. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a class on, maybe it wasn't a class on horror, maybe it was a section on ghosts. I don't remember what class it was, but I read it for school. Something that I really liked is at one point, it says Mr. Fox shrugged. Maybe Mr. Hyde was pure evil, but Dr. Jekyll would want you to believe that, even if Hyde was just Jekyll with a different face. And they also say at one point that it's all just Dr. Jekyll talking anyway, right? So the whole point is that the point of view of the original story, implicitly maybe this one too, is it's all just Dr. Jekyll and it's actually your real self, right? People have these discussions too with like alcohol and drugs that change your brain, right? Is it the
Right.
real you that's coming out? Is it the suppressed parts of you, or is it just the worst aspects of you? So I think you can kind of get into addiction here too, because Braithwaite ends up basically not blackmailing, but kind of blackmailing in a way. And blackmail is actually a very appropriate phrase here, given what's happening between Ruby and the formula. Blackmailing her into being a white woman and doing these things for her, for him. That way, you know, he can spy on his enemies. And there's this whole basically like feud within the lodge that is happening that we don't have all the details to, but is more or less causing a big ruckus. And Braithwaite wants to be on top of that so that he can come out on top and rule the lodge for himself. So yeah, this was a really cool chapter. I just the whole concept was really fun of Ruby turning into Hillary, Hillary turning back into Ruby. don't think I have too much else to say. Luke, anything else you wanna add about this one?
Yeah, actually, so in this chapter, there was the time Ruby had relations with Braithwaite, and then later in the chapter, she was given the option, like the legitimate option, to consent or not to relations again, and she she actually actively turned it down. And Braithwaite didn't rape her. He didn't try to manipulate her or anything of that sort. He was disappointed, obviously, from Ruby's point of view, but at the same time, he didn't try to force it on her in any way, shape, or form. And it was like Ruby thought that he intentionally let her have that option this time around, unlike the first time around. He would, in my opinion, if that was the case, then he was hoping to guilt trip Ruby slash Hillary into doing it again. But she wouldn't let that happen, and it was another instance of Matt Ruff writing a good, strong black woman into the story without showing it as a negative thing, because in society we white people get negative stereotypes of strong black women all the time, that they're crazy, this, that, and the other. But in this particular instance, like so many other instances in the story, in the book as a whole, he showed it as a positive trait, and that she was able to stand up for herself without quote unquote being crazy. And so I felt that was like a positive portrayal that was needed in the book.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was very nervous about that scene between Ruby and Braithwaite, and was very nervous about like what was going to happen, what he was going to say. But Braithwaite's a scumbag, but he's not that kind of scumbag, thankfully. So that was again another, like we've talked about this in the last episode, another kind of twist on what you might expect to happen. So let's move on to the Narrow House. This one is a classic ghost story. So we start up with discussions of the Tulsa riot. And for those who don't know, God, the Tulsa riot is something I didn't know about for a very long time. And what made a lot of people aware of it is, I don't know if you know this, Luke, but the Watchmen TV show, not the movies, not the comic book, but the Watchmen TV show that aired on HBO a few
Okay.
years back, opens up with the Tulsa riot, and has a lot to say about race relations back then, and just in general, because the original Watchmen, does take place in, I believe, the 1950s. I could be wrong, 1940s, 1950s, and then like I think goes throughout time. I forget where it's centered actually, but have you ever read Watchmen? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I've never watched it.
Okay. It's a much better comic than it is a book, or
Yeah.
film, I should say. The TV series is set 34 years after the original. The original took place. The
Oh,
original took place in New York. I forget exactly. Oh, alternative 1980s. I wasn't even close. They have some flashbacks to the 70s, I think, and that's what I was getting confused with an older time period. Regardless, all of this is just to say the Tulsa riot is something I didn't really know about until the Watchmen TV series on HBO. So I'm really glad they brought it up here too. For people who don't know, who haven't read the book yet, the specifically Lovecraft Country, Tulsa riot is just this horrible event, and it happened in 1921. Just basically, a lot of white people killed a lot of black people, and just broad daylight. And I'm pretty sure nobody ever got prosecuted, if I remember correctly. So it's just I mean, it's a horrible event, and go look it up if you want to know more. But it references that, and it references it kind of throughout the story a little bit, and also kind of like makes that connection between those killings of black people and other killings of black people, both in the story and out. So I really liked. I mean, like is I guess a strong word, but I liked it. I was asking questions. The one of the ghosts starts telling a story, but he doesn't really fill in all the gaps, like how he got away. Like basically, a lot of white people were chasing him, and he's like, "Yeah, I got away," and I'm like, "Okay, how?" Like, like how did you get away from all the, I'm fine if they just said I just ran as fast as I could, and before I knew it I was out of town or some shit. I don't know. Anyway, it's just a minor gripe, but it was just kind of confusing. Like,
yeah.
okay, like there's some details missing here. So yeah, did you know anything about the Tulsa riot beforehand, Luke?
I knew of it vaguely. I knew it took place in the district of Tulsa. That was basically the Black Wall Street. Like I knew that much, and I knew it was in 1921. But I really never knew too much more about that. I was hoping to buy a book on it for my Kindle, but I haven't gotten around to it yet because I've got other books that I want to purchase first. So gotcha.
So yeah, that's good. And it's something everybody should at least have basic knowledge of, not necessarily read a whole book on, but although of course if you want to. And the fact that it's even called a riot, by the way, instead of like, I don't know, the Tulsa massacre or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Uh
actually, the Wikipedia page calls it the Tulsa Race Massacre.
okay, well that's unfortunately a perfect name for it.
Yeah.
So okay, good on Wikipedia. On a separate topic, this is my ADHD acting up, but I saw this great quote that was like, "If I'm gonna get misinformed, I'm gonna go to Wikipedia, and I'm gonna get misinformed by the people. God damn it, not by AI." And I
Right.
completely agree with that. I've always loved and defended Wikipedia, so good for Wikipedia on that one.
Actually, the Wikipedia page says Tulsa riot redirects here. Wikipedia officially calls it the Tulsa Race Massacre, but the massacre commonly being known as a riot kind of contrasts with quote unquote Boston Massacre, which is actually just a snowball fight gone wrong.
Oh my
Um,
God, that's right. We learned about that all like five. Obviously, it's terrible, but five people died, and then I'm pretty sure like way more people died in the Tulsa race massacre.
right. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes from here. I'm not going to read all of it for reasons that'll become very obvious in a second. But Braithwaite basically catches up to Montrose. Montrose says, "Yeah, what are you going to threaten me with this time?" Nothing, Braithwaite said. "I was hoping we could move beyond threats." And then Montrose says, "To what? Me being your," and then I'm not going to say the next word, even if it's a quote, but you can read
Yeah.
between the lines on what he said there. He said the N-word. Again, this book has such great sense of humor. Horror and comedy is something that we are going to explore every now and then throughout this podcast. And this is one of those times where like the book just has great like little one-liners here and there. And it doesn't do enough to like overwrite the horror, but it does just enough to like mix it up a little bit, which I really
Yeah.
appreciate.
Yeah, I do appreciate the fact that it's not predominantly horror. It's not just straight up horror all the way through, that he mixes different elements of different genres in with it while still primarily keeping it horror.
For sure. So yeah, a couple other things I want to note. They discuss the magic black man trope, which I believe we talked about a little bit last episode. So
Right.
they get into more of that. And then on page 254, they also talk about kind of immunity and racism. I really like this quote about Henry Winthrop. So basically, what's going on in the story, I should say, is
Hmm.
that Montrose and Atticus, I want to say, are on a bit of a little bit of a road trip, not a big one, but a little bit of one. End up going into this house, or Montrose does anyway, and he is confronted with these ghosts who may or may not know about Henry Narrow and his magic books. And Narrow, I believe, is related to the Braitworth family. I could be wrong about that. But eventually, Montrose is having a discussion with these ghosts, as you do, Lovecraft Country. And he says that I asked for something without grasping the true nature of my request. My father was my protector too, you see. He didn't protect me the way your father protected you out of love. He protected me incidentally as a function of who and what he was. So long as I was under his roof, the only thing I had to fear was him. In seeking to free myself from him, I was also seeking to make myself vulnerable to the world. But I didn't appreciate that. I thought free meant free to do as I pleased. I thought I had immunity. And I mean, this is just like a big thing of like, God, parental abuse, racism, sheltering your kid from the world. It's just like it's a really tough moment where the characters are reflecting on their own fault. And Montrose ends up telling this heartbreaking story about because the ghosts basically want to feel something again. So they ask Montrose to tell them a really sad story. So Montrose ends up telling them a sad story about how his father was killed, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And yeah, that was some sad shit too. But Luke, anything else that I didn't cover that you wanted to cover?
So at the end of the chapter, I kind of wanted your thoughts on this because I think it's interesting to note, and I don't know what to think on this. as Montrose is leaving the property with the books and what have you, he tells Atticus that they're going to tell Caleb that they found nothing there. So I guess this is in a sense that he doesn't want Caleb to have like too much power, this, that, and the other. But I was wondering if you had any extra thoughts on how the chapter ended.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this was a very interesting end. I mean, again, they're trying to get one over on Braithwaite, and I think that's a very risky move after what we saw in Abdullah's book. But it's a move that, I mean, you kind of have to take, right? I mean, you don't want this guy to have absolute power. This white guy who is basically trying to get in charge of a religious cult that has already done bonkers things to them as a family, and obviously has no bones about doing horrible things to anyone, especially black people. It's a risky thing to do. The lie that they're doing here is, I don't know, it's risky is I guess what I'm gonna say. And we'll see how that pans out in the last like four parts of the book. But those were all my thoughts. Did you have any other thoughts you want to share about that ending?
No, not really.
Okay,
I think we've pretty much covered everything we could about the ending and of the chapter and the chapter as a whole.
great. Well, this is a good reminder, everyone, to go check out your local library or local Wikipedia entry for more on the Tulsa Race Massacre. Go check out that Watchmen TV show. I remember it being really good, and like I said, it tackles a lot about racism. It's set in a more modern time too, so always good to remember that certain presidents didn't just solve/create racism, right? Yeah. Other than that, we have another few chapters to go, and we will be right on that in just a second. All right, everybody, welcome back. We are going to talk about the rest of the book. So, first off, we're going to start with Horace and the Devil Doll. Now, I would say, and Luke, let me know if I'm wrong or not wrong, but like if you agree with me, that this was probably the scariest chapter.
I think that's a good way to put it. It seemed very, for a lack of better words, it seems like very action packed in a way, and only a way that a horror book could. So yeah, I think it had a lot of more horror elements to it than the other chapters.
Yeah, and part of the big reason it's coming from the perspective of a child, and
Right.
they're basically being tortured by this doll that I believe it's a voodoo doll, but I could be wrong, that is meant to torture them from the police so that he'll confess
Right.
to what his mom has been up to or his mom's friend. I forget. I believe it's about Hippolyta in this one, right? Or by association, or is it about Ruby? I can't remember.
It's about Hippolyta by association. Like
Right.
she's a main element of the story, even though she's not really physically present.
Correct. One of my favorite quotes from the chapter actually happens really early on in it, page 258. So I really like the part where the little boys at the beginning were kind of arguing about the ways to respond to racism.
Hmm.
And one of the things that Horace says at the end is that he's not happy, he's wise, or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I really liked, I mean, I really liked that. I liked showing the effects of racism even on kids, right? Because that's
Yeah.
something that sometimes we don't get in books like this, where you'll see the effects on adults or even maybe young adults, but you don't usually see like the effects of like living in a racist world on children, right? And if
Right.
you do, sometimes it's exaggerated for effect. It's some kind of morale or cautionary tale about like to not be racist. This is just like three kids like wondering like what they should do about the way they're being treated in the world. And there's not really a happy ending here necessarily. There's just like a wise ending and a happy ending. So I really liked that and thought it was done really well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it shows that with racism in particular towards children of color on a broader scale with bigotry in general towards children who are members of marginalized communities. I think it kind of shows a little bit of a snapshot of how these children have to grow up more quickly than children of the same age who are not members of marginalized communities.
Right. And it's also kind of shocking to look back on. I mean, they're talking about how it's segregated down to hospitals, right? So there's white hospitals and black hospitals to a certain extent, I guess. Yeah, I mean it's just crazy. I mean, you have to call another hospital that's so far away, and your family member or loved one might die in the meantime, just because like some white people, a lot of white people, ended up caring more about their race than about people's health. The line specifically that I'm talking about is Neville says that the law is not for colored people, not down there. Sue. Neville shook his head in disgust. Wind up hanging from a telephone pole, most likely. Well, you don't have to sound so happy about it, Curtis said. I'm not happy. I'm wise, Neville replied. You should try it sometime. So, yeah, Curtis goes on this whole big thing about how he's going to sue if they cut off his phone, and father's like a personal injury lawyer or something like that. You know, Neville's like, how are you so dumb about this? Like, the law is not made for us, it is made for white people. Yeah, I mean, honestly, to some extent, obviously it's a lot better than it used to be, but that is still
Yeah.
true, right? You still see the way that
Yeah.
police get away with violence against people of color. You still see the way that white people in general can, in some areas, get away with violence or discrimination against people of color. So, I mean, it's not as bad as it used to be, of course, but
Right.
there's still a lot of injustice carried out in the name of institutionalized systematic racism.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yep. So, anyway, let's move on from that. That was the intro part of it, where the three kids are kind of just talking about, effects of racism and what they think about it, kind of in an abstract way. So, um, we kind of move on from that, and eventually we cut back to Horace, and he's talking about Pirate Joe, Curtis, and a couple of the other kids. So we start with Horace, and basically Horace has this thing about comic books. I love comic books myself. I don't read them as much as I used to, but in like 2016, 2017, I went through a big phase where I was super obsessed with comics. We'll go to Barnes and Noble, and they just let you read books there. I mean, I've never seen anybody stop you. So I just went to
Right.
Barnes and Noble and I just read a ton of comics, and I still love comics. But yeah, so in other words, this story had a lot of sort of relevance for me. I mean, I'm a big fan of comics as well, and so I can kind of relate to Horace's interest. But Horace, unlike me, can actually draw a little bit and do a little bit of,
Right.
penciling and shading and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not saying he's
Oh
Picasso, but he's good at
yeah.
he's good for a kid.
Yeah. Well, hey, I can draw crude stick figures just fine.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can do really, really good stick figures, and that's about it. But yeah, this was a kind of way for us to, again, get another scene with these three kids. They, Horace ends up getting accosted by Detective Noble and Detective Burke, who we've met before. And I mean, it all just goes downhill from there.
Right.
The detectives bring him into the diner and they start interrogating him, a child, about
Right.
things that Hippolyta may or may not have been doing. They basically they try to trick him by saying his mom was in an accident, and they're trying to like get answers out of him.
Right.
And more or less, what ends up happening here is they curse Horace with by touching the back of his neck, and they leave this
Right.
mark on him. They leave this mark on him, and what it does is, I believe it lets them track him, but more so to the point, it allows them to cause him to have these hallucinations of a doll that is following him.
And it also prevents him from verbally communicating what's going on, as far as the police interrogating him and such stuff like that. Which is a little later in this chapter, we see him spelling out words with the Scrabble tiles to communicate what's going on.
Yeah, I will say that is one of my big frustrations with this story. Although I did think it was very intense and very scary. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like that, like, he didn't find some other way to do this sooner. And obviously I know, like, first off, he's a child, right? I get it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, why are you not thinking of every single way that you could do, like, write it down on a napkin, write it down on a piece of paper? At first I thought, okay, he's a kid, and he's black. So maybe,
Yeah.
like, obviously they don't get as good of schooling. Maybe he doesn't know how to write and read as much. But then, like, later on, I mean, obviously we know like he's a big reader of comics, but also like later on,
Yeah,
like he ends up writing and spelling just fine, and
yeah.
for the purposes of
Well,
like telling his mom. So I did
yeah.
find that part of the story a little frustrating because I'm like, you could just write it on a bit of napkin. I don't know.
Well,
It kind of like it felt like a plot hole to me, I guess.
my guess is that he was, as a result of his interaction with the police, he was probably suffering from relatively severe anxiety,
Yeah,
um, which is going to cause you to overthink. But on top of that, it's going to cause you to think in all of the wrong directions, right?
yeah,
So you think everything's going to go wrong, and you start going all down all these paths. But then the anxiety prevents you from thinking about solutions to the problems that you're having. It presents to you fake solutions, but you have to find a way to override the anxiety to come up with real solutions. And when you're a kid, I believe Horace is 8 or 10 or somewhere in there. At that age, not only are you going to have the irrationality of adult anyway to think of those things, but severe anxiety is going to make things way worse. So I had actually chalked that up to him suffering a kind of anxiety that was preventing him from developing real solutions to begin with. I actually think that the fact that he came up with the solution at all, despite his severe anxiety with the issue, just speaks to his strength of character.
mm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I didn't really see it that way because, like, I'm thinking it from a logical perspective, and also I'm thinking about it from a strict viewpoint of like, well, he can't he can't say the words, but you could just write them out, right? And he knows how to write, he knows how to read. He's at least old enough
Yeah,
to do that. And but I think you're right that obviously anxiety played a big factor in him not being able to do that. So that ultimately does happen with Scrabble. God bless Scrabble for basically saving this child's life. So good for you,
right.
Scrabble. Getting a little shout out here in Lovecraft Country. The shout out that I'm sure the PR team from Scrabble always wanted. But anyway, I noted something about I guess what I'd call the watermelon effect of racism.
Okay.
They so he sees these dolls in a store and they're heavily caricaturized. Basically, everybody else just passes by and doesn't really notice them, but he notices like how stretched out like the black people's faces and like their smile and their lips and just like their kind of vaudeville minstrel kind of feel. And everyone else is just like, oh, whatever, that's been there forever, that will be there forever. It really speaks to the normalization of racism, especially in that time, right? And
Right.
people can just go by that and still, I mean, people, you still see people during Halloween do blackface or do some kind of face that is not actually theirs and do something with their bodies that probably they shouldn't. I'm not really one generally to police what people do with their bodies, but pretending to be another race is just fucking weird, right? You could be
Right.
anything for Halloween and you chose to be like some kind of minstrel act, right? That's kind of weird. But still, people will be like, "Oh, well, it's just Halloween. It's just a joke. It's not serious. It's whatever. Minstrels were a long time ago. Nobody's even referencing that. Yada yada yada." So, still, I think the watermelon effect of racism is still there. Anything you noted for yourself in the early or mid portions of the story?
So nothing that, looking at my notes, nothing that we haven't already discussed. So we can continue on.
Eventually, the visions for Horace start getting really, really intense, and
Yeah.
he goes to this park and is trying to get away from the detectives, or at least he thinks he's seeing the detectives. Yeah,
Right.
we're not really sure what's real or what's not at this point. That's what makes this chapter so tense. Is I guess number one, Horace isn't the main character, right? So he could die here.
Right.
Obviously, it
Yeah.
would be horrible and it would be tragic. So obviously, this would be at the times. I mean, thinking about the Emmett Till case, and obviously more recent cases like Trayvon Martin, or God, there's so many. I'm not going to go through all of them, but basically, it would be fit the times that they were in then, let alone now, and so or now, let alone then. I always get those two confused. But anyway, that doesn't happen, thankfully, but it does increase the tension. It's kind of like when you're in like watching a bit of media and you're like, okay, this person isn't like essential to the plot. You know, he could die, right? You don't think necessarily it's likely, but it's possible, right? They're not going to kill fucking Montrose or Atticus or even like Letitia, but they'll probably like they could kill, you know, for example, Ruby, or they could kill anybody else.
Right. Actually, thinking of which, just to backtrack on the story a little bit, I'm surprised. Well, I guess you were saying that they wouldn't kill Atticus or Montrose, but that scene in the first chapter, towards the end of it, where Montrose pulls out the gun, but the magic prevents him from pulling the trigger, and then then the guy shoots him in the chest, but he still lives.
Right. I was shocked.
Yeah, me too.
But anyway, a lot of this chapter is just psychological horror, right? A lot of it is just in Horace's mind or maybe real, right? We don't know. And I really
Right.
like that. It brings a different kind of edge to the book that we haven't really gotten previously. And you know, kids love to make stuff up and kids love have a big imagination. Doesn't always mean they're
Yes.
lying, but that is, you know, a common stereotype and belief among adults. And so it leads to these really inventive but also very kind of scary and tense moments where you're like, oh my God, is Horace going to die here? Or is this going to happen? Like, especially once he finally tells and uses like, you know, the Scrabble to figure things out. I'm like, okay, well, that's his role in the book done, right? I mean, that's the main
Yeah.
thing is getting that information. So I'm like, he could die here. So it's always like it's always thinking, okay, is Horace going to die here?
Right. Which, as you pointed out earlier, it's well, I don't think you pointed this out directly, but it is a common trope, I guess, in horror films and horror books for a black character to be one of the first ones to die, if not the first one to die in the horror film or whatever else. So the fact that none of the black characters died, at least not that I can recollect, especially since the novel focuses on black people and the racism they face. I think it. I think that was well written overall. That he managed to keep everybody alive, but at the same time, there were points when you were wondering, "Oh, is this black person going to die?" But they end up not dying with a good plot twist to go along with it.
Yeah. At towards the end of the story, since I don't think we have too much more to say about this one, and really I
Yeah.
want people to experience this for themselves. It's a really good tense one, despite some of my gripes with the writing. Caleb Braithwaite ends up helping Horace, and that was a nice little kind of twist to get him back into the narrative in the last, you know, three parts of the book or two parts of the book.
Yeah.
So basically, he ends up talking about a mark and having a bit of surprising artistry to it and explaining how it works and like what he can do to get rid of it. And yeah, eventually, Braithwaite says that, you know, he's going to go and join up with, well, he's not going to join up with Lancaster. He's going to kill Lancaster and he's going to do it by teaming up with Atticus and everybody else. So, yeah, Luke, any final things you want to say about Horace and the Devil Doll?
Um. So okay, I kind of missed the point being able to mention this earlier because I didn't see it in my notes until after. But the type of doll it was, I think you said you thought it was like a voodoo doll. I have in my notes that it's an African pygmy devil doll.
Yes.
Um, so, which I think is a nice little, I don't want to call it a twist, even though that's kind of the word that's coming to mind. Matt Ruff could have used any kind of doll, really, but he used one that related back to the main character's ancestry by using an African type of doll, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a twist necessarily, but it's a good subversion of the trope, or it's a good riff on it, whatever you want to say. I like what Matt Ruff did here with the pygmy doll and of course, the self-titled Devil Doll. After Horace and the Devil Doll comes the Mark of Cain. This is a very action-packed final chapter. As a result, I didn't really have a lot to say about it. It's really plot, 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 go, 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 action, action, action. I'm gonna let Luke start off with this. I honestly don't have a lot of notes about this chapter. I'm just gonna be real. The basic plot of it is that Atticus and Montrose figure out a way to double cross Caleb Braithwaite, and so that and so that they'll be able to kill
Lancaster.
Lancaster. Yes, so they'll be able to kill Lancaster and get rid of Braithwaite one way or the other. So that's the whole thing. Braithwaite's going after Lancaster, and Atticus and Montrose and the rest of the game. Basically, everybody's here except for Horace, who's left at home because he's a kid. Everybody else is there to make sure that Braithwaite also sees some form of justice. But basically, there's a mark that makes him immune, and that's been throughout the book that he is immune to any kind of danger. I will just leave Luke to do some early mid commentary. Again, there's not a lot here to really talk about that. It's just a lot of action. I mean, there's not basically everything's built into this, and it's good action. I liked it, and I wasn't sure it was tense, and I wasn't sure if everyone was going to make it or not. I knew it was going to be a happy ending of some sort, but it's a horror book, you know? So it
Right.
could have been bittersweet. But anyway, Luke, what did you think?
Well, like you said, it's action packed. I feel like this one was the most action packed of all the chapters, and I kind of feel in a way that I'm glad like he knew how to end the book without it being too contrived, if that's the right word. Because like I'll give you an example of what I mean by a bad ending. Like in the last Hunger Games book, because I read the whole trilogy. Katniss is fighting in the war, and then she gets knocked unconscious, and then the next paragraph she wakes back up, and then one of the other people from her district had said that they had won the war while she was unconscious, but never even go into like how it happened, because they were losing the war, and then all of a sudden she blacks out and they won without
Yeah,
going and
that
looking
is.
at.
I had no idea. I have seen, I believe, all of the movies, but
Yeah.
I haven't read any of the books, and that is dumb as shit.
Right. Like I thought that was like the worst ending that Suzanne Collins, I think your name is, maybe I'm could have come up with. I felt for the book. I actually do feel like the movies provided a better ending than the books did. And usually I say the books are better than the movie, but not in that case. Like I'm glad Matt Ruff didn't go that direction where he ended the story without detailing how it came to an end. Like he at least with this chapter, you got yes, it was very action packed. It would have been easy to lose track of all that was going on unless you kind of reread here and there again. But at least he ended the book, ended the story in a way that at least kind of sort of made sense. Like one thing I remember from this chapter, which I don't have in my notes, so I might not be remembering it 100% correctly, but it was when Ruby was playing Hillary, and Hillary and Letitia were together, and then for the sake of the plot, Letitia handcuffed Hillary to like a pipe or something, and let us not forget that when Ruby was Hillary, Hillary was white, so Ruby was playing a white girl. Then the other white person that had been handcuffed to a pipe had said to Letitia, "This is what." No, no, it was the other way around. Hillary had. It was Letitia who handcuffed Hillary to the pipe, and then the other white guy said to Letitia, to Hillary, I mean, this is what you get for trusting a black girl or something like that. And both Hillary and Letitia said something to the effect of "shut your mouth," in the exact same tone, which kind of, and the fact that Hillary, who is allegedly, who according to Letitia's best knowledge was not Ruby, was not black at all ever, kind of raised Letitia's suspicions a little bit, but she ended up glossing over it. I thought that was a good scene where Hillary almost blew her cover, but didn't.
Yeah, I also really like that. And it's the beginning of it is a big summary of the rest of the book. Basically,
Yeah,
all of them go through and they start telling each other what's happened. It's kind of weird that none of them have been talking to each other, but I guess, I mean, it was harder back then, right? It's not as
yeah,
easy as it is now. You can't just send a nice little message over You can't send a quick text over or call somebody. Well, you can't call, but yeah. Anyway, so they talk about the Narrow House. They talk about Horace. He is, I think, the last one to tell all the stuff. And they also talk about Abdullah's
Yeah.
book and just basically everybody's filled in on everything that's been happening, including Ruby talking about Hillary. So that's how they get
Yeah.
involved in the plot and to double cross Caleb. Yeah, I mean, they fill in some holes here. You know, Letitia's like, that's why you didn't come to my party. And generally speaking, it's just about catching all the characters up so they all have good motivations to go after Braithwaite and go after Lancaster. Basically, they all just want the fucking cult to leave them alone.
Right.
I did also really like that scene where basically Hillary is used as it kind of reminds me of that scene from Star Wars with or the classic like prisoner routine that they do
Hmm.
in movies to fool the bad guys that they've been taken hostage or whatever.
Right.
And like the one in New Hope where pretending to be a prisoner although the it doesn't last that long, but yeah. Oh, so ultimately they do get the upper hand on them, but then Burke and Noble show up and
Yeah.
they basically figure out, you know, what they're up to. And I think that's where Hillary reveals that she had a spare key the whole time. And the whole Hillary Ruby thing, I felt like was a good metaphor for being like for being passing in terms of like not in terms of gender identity, but in terms of being black or being white, like being mixed race and stuff like that. Mulatto is what they call it. And there are some situations where, I watched the movie Sinners. Luke, I don't know if you've seen Sinners yet, but you really should. It's really, really good. But there's a character in there who, in certain lighting and certain situations, looks white, but in other situations, very clearly is like not just white, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like the whole Hillary and Ruby thing was a good metaphor for being kind of mixed race and seen as white
Yeah.
in some circles, but black in others.
Yeah. I actually, now that you bring it up, I think they did do good there. I do want to mention, I actually looked this up to make sure I got it right, but I want to mention that there was a term that you used to reference mixed race that starts with an M that is considered outdated and offensive.
Oh, is it really?
Yes, it is. I'd always heard it used in an offensive way, but that could have just been my personal experience as opposed to a general thing. But yeah, it's considered offensive.
Ah, okay. So now people use terms like biracial or mixed.
Correct.
Yeah. So that other term I use, which I apologize for, was used to be used and historically was used, but was used a lot with, using the word used a lot. Let's use a counter to say how many times I use. Anyway, historically, with racial classification discrimination, according to Wikipedia. And yeah, like I said, biracial or mixed. So I think I said mixed as well.
Hmm.
But regardless, people don't use that other word anymore, which is good to know. So thank you. Either
Yeah.
way, so yeah, it's a good metaphor for being a person of mixed race, and they never really say that, but that's something I got out of this book.
I think to a certain extent, while I believe in the idea that the author is dead theory of novels, and I believe that to an extent, right? I do believe that the author's intent matters and should be read into it, but I also believe that what the reader gets out of it is equally important, which is where the author is dead theory comes in. So I think you interpreting it as a metaphor or an allegory or as any other kind of literary device to speak of those of mixed race. I think that's a good thing to read into it.
The stuff between Lancaster and Braithwaite was pretty entertaining, just both of them playing mind games with each other and
Yeah.
figuring out how this exact was. Like, you knew that it was going to have some, like I said before, some variation of a happy ending or at least bittersweet. It turns out it's like a full-on happy ending. Like, I don't really think it could have ended much better, which is
Right.
fine. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. I do think that I know happy endings are stereotypical of like stories and stuff. I personally have a preference for stories that end in a better sweet kind of way, whereas like a little bit happy, a little bit sad. But I think for a happy ending, this worked out rather well.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, it's worth noting that they also bring in side characters like Pirate Joe, Abdullah, and Mortimer. They all come back too. So it really feels like, I know it's kind of a lazy metaphor, but or a lazy comparison, but
Yeah,
it kind of feels like the Avengers of Lovecraft Country in a way. Like they just get everybody. Everybody's there. Even people you may have forgotten about from previous stories,
right.
which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I thought that was cool too. And then, okay, so actually, I kind of wanted to talk about this ending. So
Sure.
when they're dropping off Caleb Braithwaite in Indiana, so I noticed that they were naming streets that, believe it or not, they were actually going through Hammond, Indiana, which is where I was born and raised. And I know they were going through Hammond, Indiana, because of all the streets they were naming and all the landmarks they were naming. They didn't name it as Matt Ruff didn't name it as Hammond, Indiana. You know, if you're going down Indianapolis Boulevard and you had just left Chicago, you're going through Hammond, Indiana. And then I would have don't remember what landmarks they named offhand, which if I look through the book, my luck, I wouldn't be able to find any because I only find shit when I'm looking slow. But yeah, like I don't know if Matt Ruff was actually raised in the Chicagoland area, or if he did research into the Chicagoland area so he'd get the landmarks right. But if it was the latter, I thought he did a good job.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add here as I never really went to Chicago. But yeah,
Right.
I think at this point it's pretty clear. Luke and I don't have a ton to say about this one just because there's not a lot to say, right? Everything's been building to this. There's a lot of well
Yeah.
done, well paced twists and action, and I don't really want to
Yeah.
give any of that away to anyone who hasn't read the book already.
Right. Yeah, so we want to don't want to do a spoiler on the ending, but we want to talk about it at least a little bit.
Right. So let's get to the epilogue then.
All
It's not
right.
very long, so there's not a ton to talk about.
Right.
Basically, as we said, it's a happy ending, but they don't. It's not it's not a traditional happy ending. Like the evil is vanquished and all that, but it's not
Yeah.
vanquished in like the sense that you would imagine. I
Right.
think the way that they do it.
Like I get the sense that the face of evil is gone, but the evil itself is still there. That's the sense that I got.
Yeah, I think you're right. That they won the battle, but they didn't. They're not winning the war, and or currently aren't winning the war, right? They even talk about, and this isn't really much of a spoiler, but they talk about the Brown versus Board of Education happened in 1955 through the travel guide. I mean, that's another like nice little happy bit that happens to them. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
like another battle that was won, but they're still fighting the war.
Exactly. So it all goes back to that. I mean, it's an epilogue, right? So they give all
Yeah.
these characters a little send off. So Hillary gets I guess gets all the potions and stuff and starts using
Yeah.
it in her real life to become a reporter. George and Montrose and everything like that end up going on some kind of road trip. I don't know. That's about it. Letitia ends up making friends with Hiram or
Yeah.
Hiram Winthrop. So that was really cool. I liked that.
I felt like some loose ends were tied up while at the same time leaving room for a sequel that did eventually come out. That's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, to tie up some loose ends while keeping enough open for a sequel, because I used to write all the time for like creative writing classes and stuff. The way that I wrote was that either I didn't tie up any loose ends at all, or if I was going to tie up any loose ends, it was very tempting to try to tie up all the loose ends. So for me personally, like I operated on extremes, at least in that context. So I can really appreciate the fact that, yeah, the money that was gotten for Atticus's ancestor was like stored in a safe, and then plans were made for the money, but then we actually don't see the plans follow through. So then it leaves open the gate of, well, what these are the plans, but what actually happened, type of thing, which might be in the second book if which we might find out if it's in the second book if we decide to cover it next season.
Right. So yeah, I don't think there's a lot else to say. let's talk about the book overall. I really liked it. I thought it was really great. Excellent, even. Probably one of my favorite books that I've read this year. I just love how you don't get this a lot in books anymore. I feel like you don't get a story that has multiple stories in it, but they're all interlocking and they're all building to one finale with all similar characters. At least me personally, I don't read a lot of books like that anymore, nor do I see a lot of books or hear a lot of books that are like that. So it was refreshing. I mean, it was nice to see a different kind of way of telling this story. And in general, I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the action. There's little nitpicks here and there I could take with the story, individual stories. But on the whole, I thought it was really well done. Luke, what did you think?
Yeah, I thought it was really well done as well. Like you, I like the fact that there was different stories converging into one at the end. It kind of reminded me of like how you make a rope, about how you have all these individual strings that you start off separately, but then eventually all come together at the end. That's kind of what I envisioned when I was reading the story. I thought that Matt Ruff did a very good job integrating the cosmic horror slash fear of the unknown that Lovecraft is known for, while using Lovecraft style horror to combat the very racism that Lovecraft promoted. I thought that was a very good twist, if you want to put it that way. I think I had less qualms with the story than you did. Overall, like you said, it's a very well written book.
Yeah, and to be clear, most of my problems in quotations are just nitpicks, really, or just like
Yeah.
little small things that bothered me. On the whole, I thought this was excellent and didn't have any serious issues with it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, me, Ellie Zara, and my friend Luke St. Peter on this wonderful journey through Matt Ruff's Lovecraft Country. I would say that my favorite one was probably Horace and the Devil Doll and Hippolyta Disturbs the Universe. If you had to only read a couple of the sections, those are the two I'd recommend. Luke, what about you?
I would say probably the my personal favorite chapter was the introductory chapter. The introductory story. I felt that was a very good kickoff for the story. Also, like Ellie, I thought the second to last chapter was a very good one as well. But all of the stories were good. But if I only had to recommend two stories without reading the ending, I would recommend the first and seventh.
Great. So, next up, we're going to do The Yellow Wallpaper next, which is a short story by American writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Now, the problem here, obviously, is The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story. So, what we've decided to do is we've decided to add some things to our comparison, but with a twist. So, Luke is going to do The Yellow Wallpaper 1989 from BBC, which is freely available on YouTube if you want to go check it out. And then also, I'm going to look at a short film by a high school production that is freely available on YouTube, as well as the Crash Course Literature 407, which was released 7 years ago in 2018 on the Crash Course YouTube channel. So all that's freely available on YouTube, and the short story The Yellow Wallpaper is freely available. So, ideally every episode is very easy to follow along with. This is probably going to be our easiest yet. The Yellow Wallpaper itself, the short story, is freely available, and a lot of stuff based on it is as well. So we hope you'll join us for that in a week. And until then, thank you so much for being here and watching us talk about things that we love, like horror and horrible, horrible effects of historical racism, which, just everybody loves to talk about at the dinner table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a Trump supporter.
That, hey, there it is. And when this comes out, I'm sure those people will still be around, unfortunately. So thank you so much again for everybody joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.
Goodbye.